With the Age of War Chapter 4 coming soon, the Conan Exiles devs dropped a short Q&A blog a little while ago to answer some of the more pressing questions about this coming update. The blog has been out for a hot minute, but seeing as it likely got lost amongst all the noise, I thought I'd cover it here. So without further ado, let's get into the questions. The premise of this blog is simple, and that is just to answer some of the most frequent questions about this coming update, with those questions taken from both social media and the forums. The blog starts off with a really simple one: is the Siege of Al Moriah going to stay in the game? The answer is just as simple. The Siege will indeed remain in the game, and the Sacred Hunt is a new seasonal addition that does not replace any parts of that content added last chapter. This had been mentioned a couple of times before, but I've seen a lot of people asking this question, so it is good to get the confirmation for those that are unsure. The second question was, why are there 4 chapters when it was initially said there were going to be 3? The devs answered that they've always intended for the chapters in an age to be malleable. 3 was the standard, but they've moved to 4 as it gives them a better cadence for large feature development. I do actually remember Dennis mentioning all the way back in the Age of Sorcery Chapter 1 stream that whilst 3 chapters per age was standard, they could do ages with 2 or 4 chapters in the future depending on the content they're aiming for. I think that makes a lot of sense. Not every content idea will need to stretch over 9 months or a year, and I'm not opposed at all to the idea of a 2-chapter age with a focused set of ideas. For now though, 4 is the standard to make sure that they have enough internal time to develop and get the content out properly. The third question asked, why did the devs decide to move the armor dyeing functionality from the inventory to the dyer's workstation? This is one of the questions I've seen a lot. The answer itself had 2 reasons. The first was to unify the inventory UI. By having most activities occur inside a workbench, the devs can create a small set of consistent buttons that are the same across all interfaces, aimed to reduce confusion or inconsistency, and make the crafting and workbench interfaces generally easier to use. The second was to actually justify the physical space of the dyer's bench, which was previously only used to store crafting recipes. I can kinda see both sides of this. On one hand, it was incredibly convenient to dye your armour in the inventory, and you could do so on the fly, which was a good, if sometimes a niche, option. Binding it to the bench does remove that ease of use, but it also makes the bench a bit more valuable, justifies the space it takes up, and of course it's a little more realistic. I know some people feel very strongly about this change. I personally don't have any strong feelings, even though I dye armour quite regularly. And if it is part of future changes to make crafting and all interfaces smoother and unified, then I do think that's probably for the best. That being said, I wouldn't be against adding a leveled down version of the dyer's bench that only has the dye functionality to save on space. I think that would be a very good compromise for those that already struggle to fit all the workstations into their base. The fourth question asked for insight on the changes they've made to the Sword of Crom. The devs said the sword has always historically been a bit of a problem child, and thus they've experimented with changes a few times to try and see what works best. The end goal was to still have it be one of the best two-handed weapons, with its current quirk being the sword's low durability. I don't really have much of an opinion on this, as I don't really use the Sword of Crom. That being said, just on paper, low durability doesn't really sound like a very interesting quirk to me. Some people on the forum said it seemed to drop a little more frequently than before. There's no hard data for that yet, but anecdotal is all we can use until the dev kit comes out. Again, I don't really have any opinion, but low durability to me just doesn't seem like that great of a quirk. But for better or worse, I doubt this is the last time the Sword of Crom will get changed. The fifth question is in regard to custom stack size being replaced by the new functionality, basically precise stack splitting being replaced by the quick split function. The devs said this was a matter of user experience, and they tweaked it in what they expect would be the most common and streamlined use, but are still listening to feedback about it. To be fair, not a great answer. Quick split is a great function to have, but so is precise split. Keeping precise and adding quick split is such an easy win to take, and even if people only use precise split for like 10% of the time, it's already in the game. I don't really see the point in taking it out. Not really a good answer in my eyes, but I hope precise stack is re-added sooner rather than later, seeing as basically every single opinion I've seen about it says that they wish it was still in the game. The 6th, 7th and 8th questions were pretty quick, so we'll chop them down in the same fashion. There are no new permanent tavern contacts in this chapter. Zil the Wanderer will appear in your tavern, but he is temporary as he's tied to the Sacred Hunt event, though he'll also likely return when the Hunt event returns in the future. There are no new changes to sorcery this chapter. A little disappointing given the Purge can now call a meteor storm, but I really wouldn't be surprised if we can wield that power in the future. Trebuchets are not a part of the Purge in this chapter, but it is a possibility in the future as they've already put a lot of work into them. This was also mentioned on the dev stream. They do want thralls to eventually be able to operate ballistas and trebuchets, but it sounds like it's a lot more complicated than it may seem, given that they'd have to aim, charge the weapons, load them, calculate drop, etc. The final question asked if there's anything they're keeping an eye on for combat. The devs said they're still looking at fixing enemies with unfair rotation rates, monitoring stamina consumption, and keeping a watch on how the rolling thrust changes affect combat. Aside from that, they don't want to rock the combat boat anywhere else. Given the, frankly, disastrous changes to combat last chapter, and the fixes to it in this chapter, I'm happy to hear they're not planning to add any crazy stuff, at least not for now. Although, if I may make a suggestion, I would like to see colossal weapons in the future, just obnoxiously enormous swords and clubs, sort of Dark Souls kind of style. That's just, my little combat fantasy there, I suppose. And that about wraps up the Age of War Chapter 4 Q&A devblog. They only answered a handful of questions, though many were indeed ones I'd seen repeated regularly. We may get another blog in the future. This one is left quite open-ended, with the devs encouraging people to ask questions on the forums and on social media. Honestly, I think semi-regular Q&A blogs would be a very good thing to have, alongside the player surveys, which should also be coming for each chapter. Overall, it's good to get some of the internal rationale behind the decisions, even if some of the answers weren't too great, namely the precise splitting one, though I am hopeful that with that specific one, community feedback will have precise split restored pretty soon. Thank you for watching, and of course a massive thanks to our wonderful esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. Despite a few of the not so great minor changes, Chapter 4 is looking quite interesting thus far. I've already covered most of the juicy news, so if you're looking to learn about the Purge, the Hunt, or anything else, do check out the other videos on the channel. Again, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.